gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, you have chosen me to be. You have drawn me to your wonder. You have set your sign on me.
Please be seated. Like many people during the pandemic, I used some of my time at home to cultivate a new hobby. I even took an online class, thanks to Zoom, with Hilton Carter. Now, Hilton Carter was the student, and I was a teacher and administrator at the Maryland Institute College of Art many years ago before seminary. Hilton is an amazing fine artist. He is so gifted. And when I saw that he was offering a class, I wanted to take it because it was a class in something I thought I might be able to do. Plant propagation. Now, why Hilton Carter, an incredible fine artist, was teaching plant propagation, I wasn't quite sure. But after I signed up and did a little research and followed him on Instagram, I found out that Hilton has spent many years now cultivating spaces that are absolute works of art. He's got a book out there called Wild at Home, and good for him, he now has merchandise at Target. It's kind of a big deal, isn't it? I mean, wow. If you follow him on Instagram, which I shamelessly am plugging right now that you do, if you're on Instagram, you will see that Hilton does not waste one drop of sunshine that's pouring in through his Baltimore City home. Every windowsill has a plant cutting propagating in the sunlight, every spot. He has fashioned these containers along his walls that hold test tubes, filled with cuttings from different plants. And he shows pictures on Instagram of those sweet little filament tendrils just as they're beginning to grow. It's captivating for me. I enjoyed taking the class so much. I really appreciated the flip between teacher and student. Suddenly I'm in a class and Hilton Carter is asking me if I know the answer to something he has just taught us. Thankfully I did when he called on me. How long, Dina, how long do the tendrils have to be before you pot the cutting? 4 to 6 inches. I was listening. I was taking notes and I was listening. And I got called on and I had the answer. It was so exciting, and the student becomes the teacher. My house is filling up with cuttings, which is fun, right? Trying to find space and find glass containers to put them in. And I had a little hump this week. While I was out at Claggett, I was with a group of folks from St. Andrews that included Susan Beers and Jan Brinza and Mike Looney and myself. And we joined forces with Wendy Gam. There you are. Thank you. Am I saying your last name right? I just know you as Wendy and realized I didn't ask. So Wendy was there on behalf of St. Paul's Poplar Springs. Raise your hand if you're here from St. Paul's Poplar Springs so we can look around and say, welcome, we're glad you're here. I know about half of you already, so this is fun. I only have half the names to learn. And I got to know Wendy this week along with our group. We did some really great work together, really diving deep with folks from across the country who want to understand how to really cultivate and nourish the people of God so that congregations grow and flourish. And it was a lot of work. Cultivating the church is like 14, 15 hours a day, evidently, right, Wendy? Those were some long days out at Claggett. On one of those days, I saw Crystal, the head housekeeper at Claggett. She's just terrific, loves the work she does, takes good care of the Claggett Center, and I was complimenting her on these very large umbrella trees in a sunny spot. And when I came back around, I found this. Crystal took a cutting from the umbrella tree, and quite frankly, it needed it. It was going over so that you had to duck to get out this particular door. She took a cutting and she gave it to me. And that is such a nice thing. I'll place it in front of the lectern. That seems to need some greenery. It was so nice of Crystal to give me this section of umbrella plant. I don't have one of those propagating right now, and I'm really excited to figure out how to grow this new plant. Perhaps, whoops, hang on, lost my spot because I walked around. Sorry about that. That cutting for me reminded me of, and they're sitting in the front row, early pandemic tide. Do you remember my friend Gabby and I showed up at Ed and Susan Scott's house because Gabby wanted to have some new house plants, and they gave her a section of their rubber tree that I think is called Walter, excuse me. I'm not familiar enough to call Walter Wally yet. Walter, their rubber plant, is a plant, if I remember accurately, Ed's sister gave to him when he went off to graduate school, which was, what, a couple years ago?
Sure.
Yeah, a couple decades ago, right? And so Ed and Susan have raised this rubber plant in their home and taken bits of it, cuttings from it, and early pandemic, they gave that to someone else who wanted to have house plants throughout the pandemic to take care of, and it's doing very well in her home. And I hope someday she'll be able to take a cutting from that plant and share it with others, right? Continue the care of Walter and his many, many cuttings out there. I wonder about some of these plants, this one included, and Walter, and so many other plants. I wonder, how far back do these plants go? Right? How many generations of people have propagated them and given them, and then propagated them and given them until we have them? Our text from the prophet Ezekiel in the Gospel of Matthew get us wondering along similar lines. How long have the people of God been taking cuttings and propagating God's word and giving it away? We should be wondering about what God is propagating, has been propagating, and how we, too, take care of those tender sprigs over the generations. This morning we read in Ezekiel 17 that God will take a sprig. That sounds smaller than this umbrella plant. Doesn't a sprig, like a sprig of rosemary, not that big? God will take something very small, a sprig, a tender one, and will plant it so that it will grow and bear fruit and become noble. It's very aspirational. Grow, not just grow, but grow and bear fruit. Not just grow and bear fruit, but grow, bear fruit, and become noble. Ezekiel is speaking to a particular community in a particular and very, very difficult moment. A moment of incredible communal trauma, separation from their life that was so focused on temple worship in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is a prophet talking to the people of God that are being exiled to Babylon. This was really awful. Their city is in ruins. They have lost every scrap of material belonging. All that's left is a few of them being marched off to Babylon. Their king has been blinded, the family executed, their hope in the Davidic lineage destroyed. It is a very, very dark moment. They had believed that God would always protect them, protect that sacred center in Jerusalem. And now they were doubting. And who can blame them? They were doubting. Was this good thing that they had going on with God gone forever? Could they ever trust God again? Could they ever trust God again in the face of such unfathomable violence and loss? Perhaps one reason that they did trust God again, perhaps one reason that they persevered and remain the people of God was that God chose to send prophets to them. People who were reminders of who they were. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Jeremiah and Ezekiel offered the displaced and traumatized people of God new ways to think about God, new ways to be God's people in a really different place. These prophets shored up the people's true identity. Without a temple, without a king, without a city, without any property to their name, they still belong to God. They carried that love of God, that belonging to God in their hearts, etched on their very being. They belong to God. And it was God's power, God's activity that gave them renewed hope and life and growth. And so God is also the very true center of our own identity. God propagates life through God's people wherever they are exiled or separated, with their gentle, rooting tendrils awaiting fresh soil. God creates life, and in God alone is our hope for perseverance, for renewal. The life that God propagates in God's people then grows, bears fruit, becomes noble, and promotes and supports other life. Our community of Jesus followers is a lot like the images I see on Hilton Carter's Instagram. In his house, everywhere, that light is pouring in through windows, and there are so many plants and cuttings gathering that sunshine and growing. There are test tubes with growing tendrils, tender and yet growing strong. None of the sunlight is wasted in his home. God is propagating life right here. Our tender and hopeful roots are drinking in the water and sunshine and growing from delicate to durable. Durable. And God does this. God uses God's people, like the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel, to remind all of us that even in the midst of pandemic and grief and separation and addiction and disaster and deep, horrifying tragedy, we belong to God. That never can be taken from us. We belong to God. God, who is powerful, remains with us and sends us to care for one another, to water us, to patiently care for us, to gently tend us as we grow healthier and stronger. My friends, God sent this community someone by the name of Hannah Graham, another Jeremiah or Ezekiel, a prophet for God's people. Nearly 10 years ago. When's your wedding anniversary, James, Hannah?
July 23rd.
July 23rd. I know I interviewed Hannah just before she was getting married. So 10 years ago, Hannah and I met and talked about the work she might be called to do here. God sent Hannah to us to water and gently tend the growth that God was propagating here in Glenwood. Hannah took cuttings, little cuttings from Godly Play, from youth ministry manuals, from summer camp at Claggett, from pilgrimage experiences, education for ministry, and sacred ground. And she watered them, put them into the sunlight. And she loved them and tended them. She put them in just the right amount of sunshine. And she delighted in their growth, didn't she? She did. Hannah partnered with God to propagate programs that enriched our minds and strengthened our hearts and put our hands to good work for God's kingdom purposes. And people of God, you returned the favor. You returned the favor. You watered Hannah. And you watered the ways that she was being called to grow into Christ's likeness. And when she asked, you brought in more jelly jars for those new cuttings. Well, you didn't, but if she asked, you would have. Hannah, you asked for some strange things over these 10 years to be brought in by the people of God. And people of God, you brought them. You brought in grocery bags of white bread. You brought in grocery bags of clean socks. You brought in grocery bags of empty toilet paper rolls. You brought in grocery bags of glue sticks. You brought whatever Hannah asked you to bring so that she could continue propagating through programs and presence. Hannah rallied us to be a part of God's propagation work in this community, in our own lives, and we have grown and grown and grown. This morning, some of you brought cards and placed them in that basket because you wanted to express to Hannah that you will miss her. Me too. I put a little card in there for you, and I will miss you, Hannah. And yet, because I know Hannah well, I want to tell you the truth. The greatest honor we can offer to Hannah today and every day is to keep propagating God's message of belonging and love and growth. Am I right? She's not a stuff person. She doesn't like stuff. What she wants is for us to keep propagating that belonging, that knowledge that we belong to God, to take the spiritual life that she has nurtured within us and around us, take a cutting from it, and when it is strong enough, give it away. Here's how I know this about Hannah. Hannah and I came into the Episcopal Church under the care of a person who was incredibly skillful in taking cuttings of the Spirit and giving them away. We both were nurtured in faith by a man named Van Gardner at the Cathedral of the Incarnation in Baltimore, who passed away earlier this year. Van taught me, and he taught you, Hannah, and some of the rest of us, that this work that we do as the church is not for us. What we do together as the people of God is not something we do for us. It is for us, and that it offers us so much joy and goodness, and yet it is for the community, even the whole world, the whole people of God, people everywhere. The whole community of God's beloved people, for all those who long to draw close to the presence of God that is always watering us and pushing us into that sunlit windowsill so that we might grow. Hannah, you have honored Van and the whole community of faith that raised you up by teaching us, by praying with us, by singing with us and for us, by leading us, by bringing us together in Christ-likeness. And we will we not, honor the gifts that God has given to us in Hannah's presence over the past 10 years by joining God in the work of propagating life as Hannah does. Will we do that? If so, say we will.
We will.
We're going to keep doing it, Hannah. We know you've got other things that God is calling you into. We send you with our blessing. We will not stop doing what you've taught us. Okay? Am I right?
Right.
Friends, I challenge you to look within your own spirit. Notice where God is nurturing your growth in spirit, and then be brave. Take a little cutting. Grow it in some water, watch the tendrils form, and eventually give it away, share it. For as our loving God propagates life, clipping a little bit of hope over here and setting it in a jelly jar of water in the window to miraculously send out those beautiful tendrils of longing that will grow into hardy new plants, so you and I are called to propagate life life that is hopeful, life that is good, life that is loving. Let us stand and say together the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God,
the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth,